This is the Pure Rock Show, and as I mentioned earlier in the show, we're going to have a special guest on tonight, and he is here on the phone with us. His name is Tim Durling. He just wrote a great book on Sammy Hagar called Red on Black. I call him an expert on Sammy, and we're going to have a great conversation here, and I think you'll see why I said that as you listen. A listener of the show, you know I play Sammy or one of his bands pretty much every week, so this should be a great chat with another fellow redhead. I think you'd consider yourself a redhead, right, Tim?
Well, that's the technical term, yeah.
So, Tim, thanks for joining us on the phone. Really, really enjoyed your book. Again, it's called Red on Black, A Listener's Guide to Sammy Hagar. And it's honestly something I've thought about for a long time. Being a Sammy fan since I was a little kid, just getting into music, I found early on, and it was confirmed pretty much through my whole life, that people into Sammy, especially his early years, were kind of a silent minority out there. Not too many people go way back with Sammy for various reasons. So when I saw this book and read it, I was like, wow, this is great. I've been looking for something like this, forever. So how did you get the idea to do the book, first of all?
Well, thank you, Mark, for the kind words. And the book, this is my fourth book, actually, and each case, I kind of looked around and thought, there's a deficit here. This is a book. I like to write books that I myself would like to read, and there didn't seem to be a book that that talked about Sammy Hagar's solo albums, like just the solo albums. And I think that most people aren't really aware of just how much music this guy has put out on his own, and of course as members of bands. And I think you're right. It's rare to run into someone that really knows the catalog inside and out, and I've always found that strange, given his high profile. But I talk a lot about that in the book, how hard it was to locate those albums in the pre-internet years, and just finding out what albums existed, what there were, and what the actual albums were, not the as I call them, truck stop tapes. I get into all of that stuff.
For the listeners out there, not only is it a great resource where Tim goes through all of Sammy's solo albums and other bands he was in, talks about the tracks, the history, but he gives it his opinion, and it's actually quite entertaining. Basically it's two books in one. I look at it. It's a great source and a great guide, but then you also get Tim's commentary, which at times can be very comical, and I'll bring up some lines that I particularly liked as we go on here. But I guess, was that your idea from the beginning, to be a resource and also, put your own opinions into it?
Yeah, I mean, what's different about this book as compared to my previous two books is that this one's all me. I wrote the entire thing. The previous two books that I did on Y&T and also Kansas, those are panel discussion books, because I had a lot of input from a lot of other people talking about each album by those bands. But for this one, I had a lot to say about these albums, and I've been wanting to get this stuff down, typed out, get my thoughts out. And it was never going to be, I'm a huge Sammy fan, and therefore everything he put out I think is great. I had to be honest. Mm-hmm. And I like throwing in a little bit of humor. I'm not out to be provocative or anything. And let's face it, most of the, a lot of the albums are really obscure anyway, so it's not like there's going to be a large quantity of readers suddenly enraged about something I wrote about one of Sammy's albums. But I was honest. There's some albums that I really like. There's some that I absolutely love, and there's some I'm just not very partial to. But I didn't want it to be negative. I wanted it to be, look, guys, this is what I think, for what it's worth. But I did want it to be a resource where here's the albums, here's when they came out, here's all the songs on them, here's who wrote the songs, and here's the musicians. And yeah, I really wanted it to be, if somebody was interested in, you go online, if you're not really sure what you're looking for, you're like, well, is that an album or is that a compilation? Is it a live album? I wanted something you could pick up and say, okay, when he's talking about this, he means this album that came out in such and such a year, and it was on this label, and that sort of thing. But I do like to inject a little bit of humor, because I think I kind of think that's one of the things we like about Sammy. He's always, he usually injects a little bit of humor into his lyrics, his singing, his stage performance. He doesn't take himself too seriously.
100%. And I got to tell you, that's what makes it a great read. Like, I would have been very happy with it if it was just the facts that you have in there as a great resource guide all in one place. but your commentary just makes it a really good read. And just to give an example to the listeners out there about how detailed you are, being, a big Sammy fan myself, when I see mistakes out there, they really bug me. And, like anybody would be bugged when they know something is wrong and you can't shout back like, that's not the right year, it wasn't on that album or whatever. And one thing that was always on my mind, I never knew the answer to, and you addressed it. And once I read this, I'm like, all right, this is going to be good for me because this guy's covering everything. And we'll just jump ahead real quick. And it's something so silly, but if you're into stuff like you are, because you wrote about it, you understand. The year Standing Hampton came out, 1981, on the albums, but it actually came out in 82. Always bugged the heck out of me.
Oh.
Right?
I hate that.
But what are there?
Yep,
Three people in the world that even would have noticed that between you and I? But when you covered that, I was like, wow, this is good.
Yeah. I can't understand why any record label, if they've got a release on tap to come out, just err on the side of caution and put the next year on it. It just, one of the first ones, ironically, I ever noticed it on was Van Halen's 1984, which has a copyright of 1983. Or it says 1983, 1984. Well, which is it?
I believe, wasn't that, I think that was released New Year's Eve, 83 into 84, wasn't it? I thought I had read that somewhere, and that's why that was 83.
Depending on, release dates are dicey, and that's why I always put estimated, because someone out there will say, this is not right. Most people will say it because it's not what Wikipedia says. Well, Wikipedia is a fantastic resource, but it's only as good as, the verification of its,
whoever's at it,
data,
right.
what people enter into it. Plus, you've got European release dates, which can be staggered. So I've read that it was New Year's Eve. I've also read it was January 8th. So I really don't know. So
in your research regarding to Sammy, do you know if it was originally supposed to come out in 81 and everything was printed, but they delayed it till 82? Did you find out what the cause of this dilemma is?
I didn't find that out, Mark, but that is my guess. Okay. Everything was all printed and sent to the manufacturers, and they run off the record sleeves and make the various labels and all the little moving parts that have to happen for each of the formats. And, there was like a bottleneck and it's going to be pushed back 2 weeks. It just so happens that those 2 weeks went into another year.
Gotcha. Like I said, when I read that, I'm like, this is going to be my type of book. And the second thing that as I was reading this, in my mind, I was like, I wonder if he's going to cover this and cover that. And one of them was one of the most prized possessions I've found. Again, pre-internet days where you didn't really know everything that was released out there, and you'd go to record stores and, be surprised sometimes, which was a lot of the fun going to the record stores. You see promo copies and imports and different things you never knew existed. Well, that happened to me once. It was probably in 1990, I would say, at a small record store in New York, looking in the Sammy section, and I found imported British 12-inch single from the movie Heavy Metal with Sammy's version of Heavy Metal from the movie. And on the B-side, as you know because you wrote about it, 2 unreleased songs, Satisfied and Don't Get Hooked. Never knew this stuff existed. And I was over the moon because I loved the songs and I found something, great. And when you got into that as well, how did you know about that? Was that from your collection, or did you research that, or how did you know about that single of those songs?
Half and half, Mark. Half and half. So I started really trying to find Sammy's stuff in 1988. And I can remember, it wasn't easy. You could find the Four Geffen album fairly easily, but that was about it as far as anything, past that or, anything. And there was no internet. And I always try to stress to people that, and maybe you've forgotten or you weren't live then, it was hard. If it wasn't a band that was being written about in Circus or Hit Parader all the time, you just had to do it one record store search at a time and read every magazine and rock resource book you could get your hands on. But in the case of those B-sides, I distinctly remember this. I had only just gotten Standing Hampton. Would have been buying cassettes at this point. So this would have been fall 1989, kind of close to when, your story about finding the Heavy Metal single. So I live in eastern Canada, which kind of right on, not too far from the border of Maine. So I kind of did a lot of shopping on both sides of the border. But I was in a little store up here in Canada, and it was one of those stores that didn't really have a music department. You know, they had the cassettes that were up next to the cash register, and then I remember going towards the back of the store, and they happened to have a bunch of cassettes that were not really deleted, but they were just kind of markdowns, and it was kind of weird because they were all from 2-3 years previous. And then underneath that, there were a whole bunch of 45 singles. They weren't picture sleeves, but they were just, 45 singles with the label sleeves on them. And I'm like, well, and I took time to dig through those things. I mean, I was a kid. My knees were good. I could get down. I could stay on my knees for 2 hours to look through records. And now I need knee pads, or you'd have to help me get up.
Yeah. Now for me, the same. It's not worth the effort these days. If it's out of reach, I'm like, I'm not going to go through that box.
It's like, you know what? Can you dig those out? And I'm like, I can't get down there. But I'm glad I did. I stuck with it because I found the 45 to "I'll Fall in Love Again." Just standard Canadian, Geffen 45, but Satisfied was the B-side. Well, I had just gotten the album, so I knew that wasn't on the album. And, I had to go in the living room. My parents still had the record player out. We really only used it at Christmas time at this point. It was 89, but I listened to the song. I'm like, this is fantastic. Why isn't this on the album? And I never read anything about how the song came about, why it was left off the album. Nothing. So it would have been the advent of the internet, and it would have been the advent of Discogs, I think, where I discovered that, because I was trying to find out if it was on any, I think I was trying to find out if there were any like Japanese pressings of the CD that had the song on it. But I came across that heavy metal single, and not only did I discover that it had Satisfied, but that it Can't Get Hooked, which I had never heard of. So I could go on YouTube and type it in, and somebody had uploaded it. I'm like, this is really good too. And I'm waiting for Rock Candy Records to put a deluxe version of Standing Hampton out and give us those two songs.
I mean, honestly, that any type of digital version, they've never been released digitally. I mean, the perfect place for them would have been on the Essential Red collection.
It would have been, and so would have, and I mentioned this too, so would have the soundtrack version of Heavy Metal.
That would have been a nice addition.
Which is diehard fans like us know it's a different recording.
Obviously, those came out on Epic Records in England. And those songs came out, around the time of Heavy Metal, which was the transition time from Sammy going to Capitol to Geffen. So I don't know if I read this or was in my mind, but I think he was working on those before he had his new label and he was leaving Capitol. And he got the deal to do the soundtrack song for Heavy Metal, and they probably asked him for a couple of B-sides, and he came up with those songs. So I got a feeling it's probably a heavy rights. Not that they couldn't have paid for them to put on one.
You could be onto something there, because that's one of the problems that compilations, record labels run into with compilations, which is why a lot of times you look at something like, why isn't the song that this particular band did for the soundtrack never on any of their compilations? Well, because sometimes it's not just a label issue. It's a movie studio you got to deal with.
Sure.
So that's one thing that when the Essential Red collection came out that they did really, really well. Because for the first time in one spot, we had easy access to Fast Times at Ridgemont High, The Girl Gets Around, and Winner Takes It All.
Exactly.
I was really happy with that.
As was I. It was great. When that collection came out, again, I didn't even know that was coming out, and when I saw that, I'm like, this is great. And plus the two unreleased songs that came out before his first album, which
Very cool.
I think those two songs, the first one, Call My Name. Those two songs would have blown away pretty much anything on a 9 and a 10 scale. I can't believe that those songs weren't included. I mean,
what is it? Thinking of You is better, in my opinion, than Rock and Roll Romeo.
Oh,
and it's the same music.
And you beat me to the punch, because I was going to mention that a million times better. I mean, obviously,
and Call My Name is better than Flamingos Fly or China or any of the weird covers that Capitol made him do back in the day. That was one of the funnest parts, Mark, for me for doing this book, is talking about all the weird covers he did.
I call them eclectic.
Them originally and who... Very much so. Like, I really think that they had no idea what to do with him as an artist, and they couldn't figure out whether to make him a yacht rock type of guy. They didn't call it yacht rock back then, but a lot of his material is like You Make Me Crazy and his verse, The Dock of the Bay. They didn't know whether he was a heavy metal guy, which he never really was, but he came close with songs like Reckless and we both like the Urban Gorilla. We talk about that song, but I just don't think they knew what to do with them. So his early albums are really schizophrenic and all over the place stylistically. But I find that fascinating. It doesn't always it makes for some jarring listens sometimes, but man, I just don't think people know the depth of just how much variety there is, especially in the earliest parts of his career.
They don't, and we're going to go through this because we're going to go do it pretty quickly, but I'm going to take you through most of his albums just really quickly. But on that note, my history with getting Sammy's albums, you said they were hard to find in Canada and northern Maine. I guess I was lucky, or maybe it was the year, because I started buying his stuff a few years earlier than you did. I got into Sammy in '84 when VOA came out as a little kid, loving I Can't Drive 55 video. I'm like, who's this guy? Cars and rock, I'm all into this. So I started buying the back catalog then. I think right after that I bought Rematch, one of his Capitol compilations.
Yep.
And I got the 2-on-1 cassette, Standing Hampton, in 3-lock box. But then
I remember seeing those.
Yep. And then I started going back and getting the Capitol records, and they weren't that hard to find in New Jersey and New York where I was growing up. Again, maybe because it was a couple years earlier, and as Sammy became more popular after joining Van Halen, people started looking for the older things, and they didn't do reprints of them, which I don't think they did. I don't think Capitol did reprint the CDs. I know they did the records and tapes, but...
the CDs only came out the once, and that would have been it.
Exactly, and then they're licensed to this and that. But as a little kid, to your point, I was really young, 13 years old, and I would be getting 9 out of 10 scale in musical chairs, thinking, "Whoa, this is nothing like I Can't Drive 55 here. What's going on here?" But as I got older, obviously I thought about it a lot. Two different things on the points that you made. One, we're talking about the 70s, right? So. Not talking the 80s and 90s and a lot of the yacht rock and the hard rock. I think he was reflective of his time. I think a lot of bands did different things, but I think even more so the more I thought about it. Even going back to now, I don't think Sammy's changed that much. He's always done the hard rockers. He's still doing ballads and acoustic stuff, and I think he's always liked variety himself. I don't think that was the best idea to be so unfocused on Capitol because, like you wrote on, the Red album especially, you go from like a really hard rock song to, and I'll call a spade too. The most schmaltzy song he ever did, I think, was that Try to Fall in Love or whatever. And I'm like, that
Terrible.
Is just an awful song. And,
you couldn't put any of his early albums on at a party.
No. A schizophrenic party, maybe.
The live album, you could have. But the rest of them, you'd have like one song where people would be like, "Oh yeah, that's not bad," and then the next song, "What is this? Put something else on."
Yeah, it's so true. I kind of, I started, obviously I don't like all the songs like you, but even the ones that are a little bit different, like you mentioned, Flamingos Fly, which is a song Van Morrison wrote for him. Not a bad song. The steel drums are something different, but if you're looking for like a yacht rock type song to be playing in the summer, having a some rum cocktails, it kind of fits.
I love the fact that he sings it all very well.
Mm-hmm.
It's, and the thing is, whether I like it or not, I wanted to hear it.
Exactly.
And I wanted to hear them in their entirety. So I think there's a couple things that go on as far as me having a hard time finding the stuff up here. Sammy's success as a solo artist has really always kind of been, U.S. centric. And, he used to say even parts of the U.S. were a hard sell for Van Halen, like on the East Coast.
In New York City and Boston, he couldn't sell out a club when he was playing arenas in St. Louis. It was crazy.
Yeah, it was that weird regional thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just a little bit farther up, and, in the most stuff I would find, it used to be the farther I got into Maine, oddly enough. But also, none of those Capitol albums certified. So they were all out of print and whatever was in stores would have been I'm just guessing, old stock.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really, really difficult to find, and I'm going to use the term the actual albums because I dedicate a chapter in the book to what I call truck stop tapes.
Mm-hmm.
I call them truck stop tapes. People might refer to them as, different things, but, you really have to be a certain age to appreciate this. But I guess I'll bring us into the present by saying if you go on eBay right now and you're looking for Sammy Hagar Capitol Records material, and that's all you type in under music, you've got to sort through a mountain of those to get to his actual fully realized, actual covers, actual albums. Because Capitol Records, once he signed with Geffen, they did what every former label does. They start putting out the older material. But not just the compilations, like Rematch is a legitimate compilation. The Live 1980 is a legitimate, release.
It's a great record.
But then they'd put out, I call them the truck stop tapes because they're really cheap looking. They got the writing, they got the titles on the cover. There's some versions of the Cruisin' and Boozin' that misspell his name. They spell it with 2 G's. And they're just a mishmash of songs from those albums with not a lot of information. The first thing I ever bought from Sammy was one of these tapes. It was called Red Hot. It's just a mixture of live songs.
I've seen that everywhere down here.
I call them truck stop tapes. I call them truck stop tapes because you wouldn't always find them necessarily in record stores. You'd find them in truck stops with the tapes that sat next to the cash register. You'd find them in variety stores that didn't even have music sections. You'd find them everywhere. Like they'd pop up everywhere. They did them for all sorts of artists, and they were all really, really cheap looking, and they were all really, really inexpensive. But when I started looking for his albums, they were the easiest way for me to explore that Capitol catalog. So I didn't know what songs came from Danger Zone or 9 and a 10 scale or musical chairs. I just knew the ones that were on those 2 cassettes of the studio material and the stuff that was on the live thing that I had. And so I really wanted to talk about that because before I found the actual albums, I was familiar with the songs, but they were all out of order and just different things about them. It's like they didn't really they don't do the artists justice, and some bands have it written into their contracts that you won't see those types of releases, but a lot of them don't.
No, and Sammy notoriously had a bad contract with Capitol that he had to sue to get out of, so
exactly.
No surprise there.
Yeah, exactly. And not only did that introduce me to songs like Red and Turn Up the Music and 20th Century Man, it also introduced me to Space Station No. 5 and Bad Motor Scooter.
So you weren't familiar with Montrose. Gotcha.
Down the path of this. I had never heard of Montrose, and then that very next year, I found this Hit Parader magazine, which was the top 100 metal albums of all time. Came out in spring of '89. You can look it up on eBay. And Montrose was in there. It was somewhere in the '60s, and I read about it, and I'm like, oh, that's Sammy's old band, or he was in this band, and that's where those songs. That put me on the lookout on the radar to find that Montrose album, which I eventually did. It's one of my all-time favorite albums now.
Same here.
I believe how strong the material is, and how good it still sounds, and how good it sounds for such an old album.
Absolutely, and similar to you, again, little kid, I don't think I became aware of Montrose until 5150 came out, and all of the articles about Sammy joining Van Halen, and of course going through his history, and again, it was, Montrose, what's that? I literally remember riding my bike up to a local record store, and they had a copy of Montrose, vinyl, bought it, brought it home, and that's how I discovered Montrose. None of my friends ever
And you
heard
looked
of
at
that.
the cover and thought, what is this?
Yeah, I was like, another 70s, very 70s looking thing, even as a little kid. But man, once I put that on, I loved it immediately. And I couldn't believe it. Like, why aren't my local rock stations playing this stuff? Because, Jersey, New York, Philly, where I was growing up, no one played Sammy or Montrose. No one did.
It's such a weird thing, isn't it? I mean, the album was a sleeper. It took 4 years to go gold. It eventually went platinum in '86, and but it's one of the most fans of hard rock from the '70s. Even if they don't like Sammy and Van Halen, most people will give it up for that album.
True, and it's been covered. Yeah. Songs have been covered by a zillion bands. It's always being cited as one of the best hard rock albums of the '70s. Some people call it the first American metal album. But yeah, I mean, I play Montrose all the time in my shows, so my listeners know.
So influential that you can find clips of no less than Van Halen.
That's right. They used to play Make It Last.
Best quality clips, but you can hear David Lee Roth singing Sammy Hagar song, folks.
And you know what, Tim?
It is possible.
You're probably like me, too, because every time I used to read the quote of Dave saying, Sammy has to sing my songs every night, but I'll never sing a Sammy Hagar song. In my mind, I'm screaming, Dave, you sang one of the first songs he ever wrote when you were in Van Halen.
That's all part of the fandom.
Exactly. So if you're up for it, there's not many people I can geek out on Red Rocker with, and since you're on the phone, I want to quickly go through his albums here. I'm going to put you on the spot. I want you to name your favorite song off of each album. Just off the top of your head. Obviously, it's a hard decision to make on some of these albums, but the first thing that comes off to your head, and I'll give you mine too. And if conversation sparks, great. If not, we'll just fly through them. But I think this would be interesting. And this is what Tim does, people, in his book, Red on Black. The Listener's Guide to Sammy Hagar. He goes through every record, goes through all the songs, and gives opinions and facts. It's a really good read if you're into Sammy, or even if you just, casually like him in Van Halen or some of his stuff. You're going to learn a lot, and it's very entertaining. So let's get going to 1976, the big debut of Sammy, former Montrose singer that nobody ever heard of, called 9 on a 10 Scale. What's your favorite song?
It's got to be Urban Gorilla.
Correct. That song, if he did a whole album of that, my God, it's just as heavy as anything on Montrose, and just a killer tune.
Well, that's just it. What if he had, it makes me wonder, what if he had signed with Warner Brothers as a solo artist and still had Templeman producing him?
You got to wonder. But things have been a lot different, right? I mean,
I first heard that on one of those truck stop tapes, one called Turn Up the Music. It was on there. And yeah, it's a cool song. It borders on progressive, and it's just a cool song.
And it's actually one that he actually played in concert. I'll save this to the next album. Put this on hold right now. Let's go to the next album, which is called Sammy Hagar, also called the Red Album. And Tim, you did it again when I was reading this, because I also have the BGO CD edition of that album that they actually title Red. I was like, my God, this guy knows his stuff. So, favorite song from the Red Album?
Let's see, what is on that one? See, this is just it. It's really hard to think. It's like, well, what was on that stupid truck stop tape? Let's see. The Red Album, the striking hypnosis artwork. I may be cheating a little bit.
Go ahead, open up your book. You got your book right there.
I mean, okay, it might be a cliche, but I'm going to say Red.
That would be my choice too.
It established. It's an awesome song. It's got a mini drum solo in it, and actually, that was the first thing I heard on that Red Hot cassette. That's the first song on there. It's the version from All Night Long. And so it's the first Capitol recording I ever heard from him, but it's still one of my favorite songs of his.
And it's one of pretty much only a couple Capitol-era songs that Sammy will still play in concert every now and then, much to the chagrin of old-time Sammy fans like myself, who are always complaining, why doesn't he play some more of this old Capitol stuff, which he never does. But
I'd love
Red
to
is one
hear
of them.
like modern, supercharged versions of some of these songs.
Would be amazing, would be amazing. We're 2 for 2 for my friend with Red, and that was a really good entry in your book when you talked about the different songs. You had some pretty strong feelings about some of them. But I want to bring that up right now because I thought you might find this amusing. I have a CD bootleg of Sammy from March of 1977 from Austin, Texas on the Red Album tour. Check out what he played during this concert. I mean, this would have been a great one to go to. Obviously supporting the Red Album. So he opened up with Rock and Roll Weekend from that album. Makes sense. Goes to Love Has Found Me. Deep cut on that album. One of the best songs on that album,
Great,
in my opinion.
heavy song, yeah.
And the third song you're not going to be happy with. This is one I was laughing when you were writing about it, how much you hated this song. Fillmore Shuffle.
Man,
what do you make of that? He actually played that in concert supporting that album.
It must have been what he liked. I just don't get it. To me, man, I don't get it.
I was laughing when you wrote that because, my opinion, I think it's okay. I don't think it's the worst song on the album or the best one, but I was reading how much you didn't like that one. I was getting a laugh out of that.
Well, sometimes it's not like the songs that are blatantly bad, like try to fall in love, like that's so maudlin and bad and dreary. It's not a good ballad at all.
No.
So you do have strong opinions about stuff that hits you like that. But a song like Fillmore Shuffle I found so generic and so mediocre. It annoyed me the more I listened to it that it took up space on an album. I guess that's where that comes from.
That's great. I'm glad you expressed yourself on the radio. That's what I was laughing at in your book. That's hilarious. Fourth track, we're both going to be happy about. Urban Gorilla. He was playing that on his second world tour.
Awesome.
I was psyched to hear that. I mean, this is a great bootleg, too. Really great versions of these songs. The next song was another one you did give props to, that it was a good song, but you had issues with the lyrical content, which I totally get, but I think this is a great song. Also the title of one of his truck stop tapes called Cruisin' and Boozin'.
It is a catchy song, but the lyrics are terrible.
They are. I was actually
never
shocked.
Get away with that now.
I've never heard that on the radio
Yeah.
before, understandably, because I never heard any of the Capitol stuff on radio pretty much. But on KLOS in L.A., the biggest rock station in L.A., been around forever, they actually played Cruisin' and Boozin' a couple of years ago, I heard, on a lunchtime specialty show. I couldn't believe they were playing Old Sammy, let alone that song. I was like, wow.
Yeah. Well,
Respect.
It's a single. Like, that's the crazy part.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so only 3 more songs here. He did a version of Silver Lights, Part 1 and 2. He got really into his spacey, progressive live stuff here, which is a really cool version. And then he finished up with Red and Good Rockin' Tonight from the first Montrose album. What a great little set, huh?
Nice. That's not bad. That would make a nice little companion piece to All Night Long.
Oh, it would be amazing. Yeah, I mean, this was only, I guess about 10 songs. I imagine he was probably opening up for someone in 77 there. So it was probably...
maybe an opening for Boston or... Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought you might find that interesting since you were talking about all these songs.
That's
Which ones he
cool.
thought were strong.
I did not know about that.
All right, let's go to Musical Chairs next, which, again, geekdom here. Recently re-released on CD by some label. I can't remember who. I think it might have actually been, whoever owns Capitol these days. And get this, Tim. I might be breaking news for you. On the album cover, they stated it was called Musical Chair. They forgot the S on an official release of Musical Chairs.
Wow, someone needs a hand slap for that. It takes about 10 seconds to check something like that.
Is that crazy? I'm looking at this in the record store. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. How did they spell this wrong?
Yeah.
Favorite song from that album?
I've never understand how those things get that far off the drawing board.
Right?
You know what? I'm going to go with Crack in the World. Interesting.
That's a very interesting choice. That's a deep, deep cut. Good tune. My favorite is going to be, it's probably the most obvious, but I think it's the best song on the album. Turn Up the Music. Got to go with that one.
Great. I thought about Reckless, but I went with Crack in the World.
If anybody knows Sammy, he really is into space stuff. He believes he was abducted by aliens, and he's always had space songs on his albums. And that one especially
and
hit me.
He's
he
never
had a few
wavered
in
his retelling of it.
Never.
Right? He's never wavered in his retelling of it.
Nope, he truly believes it. And at one point, I'm sure you read about this too in your research, he wanted to do a whole rock opera, a whole space rock opera album. It never materialized. But
I think he was sprinkling some of those songs throughout these albums.
Oh, he definitely was. And Musical Chairs especially, right?
Little Star Eclipse. And yeah.
Yeah, Musical Chairs says what? It has Crack in the World. It has Someone's Out There. I mean, all these
Someone Out There,
songs,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now we go into my favorite era of Sammy, which is Street Machine and Danger Zone. To me, those are like his top solo albums, especially, even of the Geffen years, I prefer them. But let's go to Street Machine. What's your top one on that one? This was hard for me for these two.
Well, he was getting better, that's for sure. And by the time Street Machine came around, it was pretty much all a hard rock album, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. I hate going with obvious choices. I hate it. I got to go with Trans Am, Highway Wonderland. It's so
That's
good.
Great. Yeah.
So good.
That was my number 2.
It's you probably noticed this in the book. I lamented the fact that, if Capitol let them do videos, we might have seen the precursor to the Can't Drive 55 video here. I mean, imagine if that had a video done for it. It might have been cheesy, but it would have been fun to watch.
It would have been great. It would have predated MTV even in '79 when that came out. It would have been really cool. My favorite from that one, and this was really tough for me. Honestly, it was between 3. It was between Trans Am, Feels Like Love, which I think is a great album track on that one. But I went with This Planet's on Fire. To me, it was an obvious one, but I had to pick that one as number 1. And even Dave Mustaine of Megadeth loves it. Megadeth recently covered that, which they did a great cover of that if you haven't heard it. Great, one of his heaviest songs.
I make mention of that at the end of each chapter. If anybody covered songs from those albums too, I said, hey, if you want to hear a really heavy version or things like that. But yeah, that's a great song, and but I got to go with Trans Am. I mean, to me, that sums up Sammy right there.
It sure did. Before he got a little more money, moved on to Ferraris.
It's also where I got the title of the book from.
That's right. Danger Zone, last album for Capitol, the last album of his deep, hard-to-find records on the Capitol anyway. What would you go with?
Yeah. I really like 20th Century Man.
That's a great song.
I'd really like to know what his neighbor was doing to make him yell at him, tell him to shut the door.
Exactly, especially in the live version, live 1980.
Yeah, shut the door. What the? Yeah.
Yeah, no idea what that song means, but that's a great one.
I like that song. I think it's a really cool song. I mean, that's a good album too. I mean, Love or Money is fantastic, and In the Night is really good. Yeah, boy, that's a really good album. But yeah, probably 20th Century Man.
You just named my top 3. My number 1's Love or Money. I just love that song. I love Neil Schon of Journey doing the guitar solo on that one.
Yep.
And Steve Perry singing back up on a bunch of songs. I mean, that album to me that's probably my favorite Sammy solo album from top to bottom. Moving on to the Geffen years. Got signed for quite a big signing bonus. At the time, Sammy always stated this. Geffen had signed Donna Summer, Elton John, and then him. Don't know if that's factually true, but he always said that. Oh, and John Lennon. So he's up there with good company. And he came out with Standing Hampton, which was another world from Capitol. Talk about being polished in the studio and just more structured. It was unbelievable. It was only a year or two apart, but to most people, or a lot of people, that's their favorite album from him. I have some issues with some of the songs on that one, why it's not my favorite, but there are definitely some favorite songs on that one. What would you go with as your favorite?
Oh man, that's a tough one because that's. I actually think that's quite a strong album. I do think it's a little front loaded.
That's my issue with
the best song. Yeah. But you know what? I'm going to go off the beaten path a little bit. I'm going to go with Sweet Hitchhiker. I really like that one.
That is a great one. That closes the album.
To me, that's the only real rocker on side 2. But it's a good one.
Meat and Potatoes rocker, absolutely. That's a great choice. I'm going with an obvious one. I mean, I don't need to hear it ever again, but I got to go with There's Only One Way to Rock. To me, that's just a terrific rock song.
That to me that song, for me, I still hear. I still think the definitive version of that one for me is from Live Without a Net.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the first time I ever heard that song. I don't even think I realized it wasn't a Van Halen song because I think I saw the concert fairly early on in my fandom. But the dueling guitars but I mean the studio version's fine, but it's just it became an honorary Van Halen song in those years, right? They always did it. A lot of times they opened with it.
Yep, that's right.
But it's still a great song. But yeah, Sweet Hitchhiker, that's going to be my choice for Standing Hampton.
That's a great one. And just real quick on Standing Hampton, since it is such a big album in his career, the first one to go platinum, the first one that got him some real radio play. To me, the misses are such misses. It ruins the entire album for me. It doesn't, ruin the songs I really like, but did he really need to do that cover of Surrender? I mean, to me, that's a top schmaltzy song, in my opinion. Inside Looking In, I don't need.
It's pretty light.
Mm-hmm.
I like Inside Looking In, but I'm not. Yeah, Baby It's You, Surrender. Those are pretty lightweight. So, and honestly, I need never hear anybody do Piece of My Heart again. Although I have to admit, that's the first time I ever heard it.
Oh, is that right? Wow.
I didn't know it was a cover. I did not know it was a cover.
You hear Sammy say that, he wrote 20 or 30 songs for Standing Hampton. I was like, well, why did you just put, 6 or 7 originals and a couple of these other ones? I'd love to hear these other, 10 or 20 that you claim you wrote.
There's a box set. There's a hell of a box set that could be put together, Mark. And now that Universal also has access to the Capitol stuff or the EMI stuff, why not?
I'd vote for it. But yeah, that's, to me, it's continuing with the Capitol era. Again, it's just obviously all opinion, but those few songs in that album, like most of his Capitol records, or some of them anyway, where they just had some songs I was just scratching my head. I'm like, how does Surrender fit into the same album as Heavy Metal and One Way to Rock? Like, this just isn't adding up. But anyway, that's an even bigger issue for me on his next album, Three Lock Box, which, again, I know a lot of people like that a lot.
Wow.
To me, there's only
a
couple.
Favorite.
Is that right? You're one of them. So to me,
that's my favorite Sammy Hagar solo album.
You're kidding me. So
always
go ahead, speak your mind. Why is that your favorite, and what's your favorite song?
I don't know. It was the first. No, it wasn't the first anything. It was just one I picked up fairly early on, and I don't know. I just like the whole album.
Okay. There are no misses on that one. There's no songs that you didn't care for.
No, but I get the feeling that. But that's the great thing. We all hear these things. We hear a lot of things the same, but we hear things differently, and that's what's great about this. And that's what I hope people take away from this book, because I'll probably I talk about some albums that I just do not like of his. That I hope people don't go, well, this guy's not a fan. I'm obviously a fan.
Obviously.
You know, I'm obviously a huge fan. But I'm going to go with Rise of the Animal.
That's one of the few songs I actually really like, so I'm glad we don't disagree on that. Yeah. That is a great song.
Yeah.
I'm going again with the more, non-surprising one. The title track, Three Lock Box, would be my favorite.
I mean, that's amazing. Three Lock Box is amazing, the song. Yeah.
And that was his first video that he did for MTV. But yeah,
yet they didn't do a video for the big hit off the album. That just doesn't make any sense to me. But then again, Geffen was a fairly young label at this point. So.
Well, funny you bring that up, Tim, because as I'm sure you know, Sammy actually responds to a lot of his comments on his Instagram account. And one of the comments I once made was exactly that. I forget what the topic was, but he literally said that. Maybe he was talking about the video for Three Lock Box, and I literally asked him why Geffen didn't have him do it for You Love Is Driving Me Crazy, the big single. And he actually replied to me.
Yeah.
And his answer was, MTV was just starting. They didn't know how big it was going to be, and they didn't want to put more money into doing video. And they just did it for the one song, for Three Lock Box, which I thought was interesting. You'd think they would do it for the pop, top 40 aimed single, but
or Never Give Up, which was the second single and almost hit the top 40, and might have with the help of the video, because MTV didn't have a lot of videos to play.
No, anything they got, they were playing pretty much.
And not one video from Sammy Hampton, which came out after MTV had already been on the air. I know we're getting off topic, but those are things that perplex me. And I like. Just a quick aside, I wrote a book about Y&T, which is one of the most overlooked rock bands ever. They're one of my favorites. And A&M did not do videos for either of the first two A&M albums, 81 and 82, and I think those were enormous missed opportunities.
Absolutely. And it's funny, the last interview I did a few weeks ago was Dave Menichetti. He was here in town, and I interviewed him.
Oh, man.
Great guy.
So good.
And I love Y&T as well, and I mean, he talked about this at length. Both his London Records and A&M Records career, they both pretty much dropped the ball in the band, unfortunately. A lot of mistakes.
At almost at every turn.
Exactly. But yeah, I got to get your Y&T book. I'll definitely enjoy that one too. I love Y&T. All right, let's move on here. We won't go through every album because we're kind of running out of time, but let's do at least the big ones here. VOA, which was his real breakout album thanks to video. So we're talking about videos. I Can't Drive 55. That's what me as a little preteen kid got into. And I think it's a great record. I mean, my favorite song on that, again, I'm going to be... You know what? I'm going to do an audible. I'm going to say my favorite song. I was going to say I Can't Drive 55, but I mean, it's one of those songs I just never have to hear again, as great as it is, and at the time I loved it. But my second favorite song, and I'll go with my favorite, is Swept Away. That was a really different, cool song for that album. We got a match.
Me too, and for that reason, I think we like it when Sammy sticks. I like when he sticks to what I call meat and potatoes hard rock, but this Swept Away goes a little bit outside of that, and I think it should have been a single.
It should have been.
I think that is such a cool song. I think that is such a cool song. Now, I have issues with VOA. I know it's his biggest album. I think VOA is half of a good album, and that half is side one. Mm-hmm. I think it runs out of steam really quickly.
I'm trying to remember, because I have the CD on side two. Obviously, the songs we could do without Burning Down the City, which is a waste.
VOA. Burning Down the City is kind of
Yeah.
Don't Make Me Wait. To me, the good songs are on side one. Rock Is in My Blood, I really like.
Yep.
But yeah, Swept Away is such a cool song that, I mean...
What is Two Sides of Love on? Is that on side one or side two? I don't remember.
That's the last song on side two, and that's a good pop song, too.
I think that was a great commercial song. Yep.
Well, the other thing, Mark, that's weird is it's 1984 and he puts out an 8-song album.
Yeah, it was a short album.
It's a pretty short album for 1984, yeah.
And plus, if you cut out Burning Down the City, which goes on and on and on and on forever, I mean, to me, it was just like filling up the clock here. Which, he might have actually not had much material or time to do that, because that was coming off the HSAS album, which he obviously spent time writing songs for.
Oh, man,
right?
And I think there's a song on that HSAS album. I mean, I don't want to spoil things, but I write in the book, he should have, he said when they were doing that album, he already had Can't Drive 55 in his back pocket. Mm-hmm. But he saved it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Neil told him to.
HSAS album.
Did you read that?
That I think.
Mm-hmm.
No.
I was going to say the story is he presented it to Neil, and Neil said, "You know what, Sammy, this is just way too you. Just save it for your next album. Let's do something different together."
Which is, he's right.
And he was right.
There's a song on that album, though, that Sammy should have said to Neil, "Look, let me save this for this album, because it could have been a hit, a big hit.
Yep. I know which one you're talking about, too, and I agree, and we'll have the readers read about it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, to me, it's like that, man, this didn't stand a chance on this album, because how much promotion was Geffen going to do for this? It was a complete vanity project, right? But yeah, there's one song on there that could have been, I think, at least a top 15 pop single.
I still do love that HSAS album. I was always hoping they would do more.
Me too. I think it's weird, but I like it more the more I listen to it. So and that was one that took me a long time to find too.
Yeah, same here. I had it on vinyl, but then when I started getting CDs, I had the hardest time because once the Geffen original CDs were gone, I never found them. I actually found them on vacation in California on an import label. I don't remember what it was, but that's how I bought HSAS and CD. I had to buy it on some import label, which that store actually had a VHS bootleg of the MTV HSAS concert, which I purchased too at the time, again, before internet.
I'd like to see a deluxe version of that come out with all of those songs that didn't make the album.
So much material. Unfortunately, I don't think there's enough people like us out there to make these things financially feasible, but maybe one day
Rock Candy could easily do that. They seem to have the resources.
Let's start a petition.
Yeah.
All right, so we're winding down here. I'm not going to go through all of his latest albums because there's just way too many. I'll finish up with I Never Say Goodbye for your favorite song, though. That was the last solo album he did while he was in Van Halen. He was contractually agreed to do, or had to do another album. Some people said it was, a quick throwaway project, but I think it was one of his best solo albums. Eddie Van Halen played bass.
I think it's way better than VOA. I think it's a stronger album.
Definitely better songs on it. Absolutely. I don't think it's a throwaway at all. Yeah. So what's your favorite on that one?
Well, I got to go with When the Hammer Falls. I mean, it's got some
first
of Sammy's
track.
best screams. It's a heavy song. I like the fact that I think they took his scream at the end of it and it was just one continuous one, and that's the first thing that you hear on the vocal when the song gets going.
Mm-hmm.
I think
it's a great scream.
Like a continuation of that to me.
It's a great scream.
And I think there's some good stuff on there. I mean, Hands and Knees is good. I like Privacy. Yeah, that's a good, strong album.
It is. I mean, of course, and two of the songs became staples with Van Halen in his solo career afterwards, Give to Live and Eagles Fly. Always, every single one of his concerts, he played one of them since that album was released.
Yeah.
That being said, though, my favorite, this was a little tough because I like this album a lot, but I went with Returning Home, which is part of his space theme. And that song and Hammer. That song and Hammer, he actually played with the Wabos, too, so he obviously liked both those songs a lot as well to play. So after that album, obviously, back in Van Halen until the ceremoniously split, Marching to Mars was the first album he came out afterwards, and I'll just ask you this. Can you pick a favorite post-Van Halen album that Sammy did, whether it be with himself, the Wabos, The Circle? I'll leave Chickenfoot out of it because that's another whole beast, but what would be your favorite album post-Van Halen, Sammy and Circle?
Oh, it's Marching to Mars.
We agree on that, too. That was easy.
Absolutely. Marching to Mars is my second favorite Sammy album. I distinctly remember buying that and thinking that there's so much of him in that album. There's so much hurt. All of the betrayal and the shock. I hear it. It's in it's in the grooves of that album. And I've just always really, really, really enjoyed it. And if I had to pick a favorite song off of it, I'd probably go with Leaving the Warmth of the Womb.
And we agree on that, my friend. I was just waiting to see what you were going to say. Yeah. The original Montrose reunion, how could that be bad? That, to me, made that album.
I love it.
Made that album. I always wished he'd played that.
Within his solo album, there's a Montrose reunion. I love the fact that, he got booted out of one band, but he reunited with his first band. And, by the end of that album, by the time it gets to the title song, it feels like he's gone through this, it's going to be all right.
Yep.
Not to, quote another one of his song titles, but, and to me, in all honesty, I write about all of those albums, and there are quite a few of them. It was mixed results, but I will say that I'm a pretty big fan of the last two. So that's
the Circle albums.
The future.
The Circle albums.
Yes, I think they're both quite good.
You know what, Tim? We might have to do a part 2 in a few weeks where we go through the post-VH Sammy and go through all those albums, because I think we could have just as much fun.
I'd totally be up for that.
Going through all that.
I never get to talk about this stuff, so.
Same here. This is great. And believe me, I feel like I'm doing it right now, but we're running out of time. But I'll definitely take you up on that. Maybe when you do your second printing of this book in a little bit, after all these sell out, we'll have you back on and talk about part 2 of Sammy's solo career. Anything else you'd like to say about the book? I know people can get it on Amazon, right?
Yeah, all my books are available through Amazon, wherever your home country is. And, you may not agree with my opinions, but I think you'll agree with me that there hasn't really been a book like this, and I put a great deal of care into it. And my good friend Matt Phillips from Go North Design did another great job designing the book. All of the pictures of all the albums on this book, inside the book, are from my own collection. And I really tried to mix up the formats. I'm a bit of an 8-track nerd, and I think people would be surprised to see some of his albums that actually did come out on that format.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, it's very much, it's an easy read, and if you've got somebody on your Christmas buying list that you never know what to buy for, they're a big music geek, and they like Sammy Hagar and Van Halen, then hey, go for it.
And I have to
really appreciate it.
I have to give the book my high recommendation. As hardcore Sammy fan as they come, I really enjoyed it for all the reasons you just said, and you could tell you put a lot of work into this. I do have one last quick question, though. Just curious, did you have to get the rights to use all these pictures in this book of the albums and of Sammy and everything, or do you just, is that necessary for putting a book like this?
The front cover photo, the front cover photo of Sammy we licensed from Alamy.com. It was somebody's photo they took at a concert, so we paid to license it. Everything else, like I said, it's my own collection. It's pictures of stuff that I bought and paid for. So
gotcha.
I've done that with all of my books. So yeah, pretty much if you see something inside of one of my books, I actually own it.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, Tim, this was so much fun. I can't even tell you. I could do this another hour with you, but all good things must come to an end. I thank you so much for making the time and for writing this book. I really appreciate this book. This will always be in my collection. Awesome stuff.
Oh, thank you, Mark. I also, just a real quick shout-out, Greg Renoff was very generous and wrote the forward to this book, and that's a name a lot of Van Halen fans will know.
Oh, absolutely. Talk about a great writer about all things Van Halen. He's the man.
Yeah.
All right, Tim. Again, thank you very much. Have a great night, and I really appreciate your time tonight on the Pure Rock Show.
Thank you, Mark. Always good talking Hagar with people, and yeah, thank you. Thank you for letting me do this.